Are we live now? Good morning and welcome to today's panel discussion on women, peace and security, the role of women in peace building in the Eastern Partnership region. As peace and security challenges grow increasingly complex across the region, the need for inclusive and sustainable peace building has never been greater. Evidence shows that when women are meaningfully involved in peace processes, the outcomes are more effective, durable, and grounded in local realities. My name is Anne Helge, and I coordinate the Swedish network for the Eastern Partnership at Forum CIV, a platform of 37 Swedish organizations working across Eastern Europe on democracy, human rights, and sustainable development. I'll be your moderator today. This webinar is brought to you by Witnet Sweden and Forum CIV, and it's the second in our series on gender equality. And over the next 90 minutes, we'll explore the critical role women play in peace building, their contributions, the challenges they face, and what's proving effective in practice. And we'll also share recommendations for strengthening women's leadership and influence in this space. We have a remarkable lineup of speakers today, and let me introduce them. Shala Ismail is the chairperson of the Women's Association for Rational Development. And through her organizations and other platforms, she's led impactful community-based initiatives to advance women's rights, even in the most challenging contexts. Regina Jerebova-Askerova, Regional Director for South Caucasus and Eastern Europe at Kvinna till Kvinna Foundation. She brings extensive experience supporting women's rights and civil society in conflict-affected and politically sensitive regions. Christina Johannesson, Swedish ambassador for the Eastern Partnership, with a strong background, diplomatic background, and deep regional experience. She is a passionate advocate for gender equality. And Mickey Roos, Senior Women Peace and Security Specialist at the Folk Bernadotte Academy. Her experience from international missions to military advising makes her the prominent voice for women's inclusion in peace processes. Gertrude Ostrom, chairperson of Women's Baltic Peacebuilding Initiative, as a leading gender equality strategist, she brings a strong track record of integrating gender perspectives into policy, sustainability, and peace building. Thank you all for joining us today. We'll begin with a few questions to our panelists to set the stage and then move into a more dynamic conversation. Toward the end, we'll open up for audience questions, and so feel free to drop yours in the chat at any time. Let's begin with the local context in Azerbaijan. Currently, women hold just 17% of parliamentary seats, and formal peace processes often lack female representation. Yet we know that women are actively engaged in the community level. Shala, you've been a leading voice for women's rights in Azerbaijan. How would you describe the current state of women's participation in peace building, and what is stand in their way for including them fully?
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure and honor to be here today, and thank you for this opportunity to share some insights from the local context. Indeed, I've been working on the peace building for more than 25 years now, quite a long period to understand that it's absolutely uneasy, topic. And peace building is not a project for me anymore. It's my life work, it's my mission, and I'm doing it all the time, no matter where I'm located and whether or not it is regarding on Azerbaijani women or a broader context. In Azerbaijan, we are, that we passed through the 3 decades of the war and unstable situation, and even in those times when we had the ceasefire, there were quite hard times to deal with the consequences of war and conflict. We are at the eve of the signing the new peace agreement at the moment. I should admit that Azerbaijan and Armenia has been closest to the peace than ever in the last 3 decades, which is very good. It's a very, very positive development. On the other hand, if we look at the dynamics, to what extent women are involved into the process, I should say that we do not have much progress in this regards, taking into account the representation of women at the formal negotiation table. This sphere is quite a men-dominant still, and we do not see much female engagement generally into any formal process as such. However, there is, so at the track 1 level, no. At the track 0.5 level, we are seeing more experts, female experts being involved at different stages of dialogue. And the good thing is that these dialogues are becoming more and more emerging. I would say I'm myself engaged in 4 dialogue processes. All 4 are coordinated by international organizations, and among them are the formats where we are only women to women, and also just 1 format out of 4 in which I'm engaged, but also the mixed formats when you are together with your male colleagues and you are there to discuss not the women's issues, which is also very important, because whenever the female colleagues are engaged, it's mostly when the agenda is merely limited, narrowed down to the women's topic, while it should not be limited only to that. We are there as experts on women, peace and security, still should be contributing more to the peace and security rather than just on the women's issues. And I'm pleased to say that at least myself participate in the 3 formats with a mixed formats where I'm able to contribute to the peace and security issues, being able to discuss the hardcore issues, starting from the challenges of the current status quo up to the perspectives, and I'm able to develop certain scenarios. I'm able to contribute to the recommendations, which are hopefully then delivered to the relevant stakeholders. It is a great feeling. What is bad in this format is that still there are not so many these sort of formats, still a very limited number. Plus, honestly, I don't see many women around the table on either of the side, be that Azerbaijan or Armenia. Mostly it is the same people in the list, which on one side, of course, adds to our credibility, let's say personally. But if we go beyond that, it's of course not very good to have this. And we would love, of course, to have the new faces, the fresh, people, the fresh minds. And just taking this into account and seeing how important it is to involve new people, we decided to set up the Women's Dialogue School there at Women's Association for Rational Development, which is, by the way, turning 23 years old this year. And this is an informal platform for those people who want to grow into the mediation, to grow into the negotiation, to grow into that high level of the dialogue. So the first group of the Women's Dialogue School was launched last year, in the end of last year, and we are moving still through the mentorship period. And this is a wonderful schema as an example what can be done in the local context when the political sensitive situation is there, when the situation with the safety and security of the human rights defenders and women human rights defenders is still very unstable. There are still some safe areas, relatively safe, of course, but still some areas where it's possible to continue operation in, and one of them is doing purely educational programs, building the capacity, strengthening the capacities, and trying to bring up the new generation of the specific groups. And exactly under this group, we are developing this, new generation of the women in dialogue, women in mediators as such. That's a wonderful project on itself, and I think that can definitely be replicated across the region. So far, we don't have this formal structure as such in the region, so that's something we can definitely share. The capacity building itself, just very shortly for you to give the scope, that it consists of the training, 9-day intense training on the peace building, conflict transformation, mediation, negotiation, communication. plus the 2 months mentorship with a selective mentees. 50% of those who have the training have the possibility to have the access for the mentorship. And then after that, we are selecting the top rated awardee for the 1-week fellowship program in Europe, which gives them both the motivation but also certain access to certain stakeholders. That's just an example. I can definitely tell more examples which are very successful, but the most important here is to ensure that something is ongoing in the countries like Azerbaijan. We know that it's getting harder and harder. The shrinking space for civil society is there, and it's deteriorating every day. It's uneasy, and there is a big security and safety risk for both women human rights defenders and the women peace builders. Yet it is so important to keep this fire alive, and the more engaged we stay, the more possibilities for us is to prove that we are doing the right way of things. And again, for me personally, who is engaged for 25 years, none of the things which I'm mentioning is a project anymore. It's like my life work, my life vision, mission, and I cannot really separate what is a project for me anymore. So I definitely can elaborate more. I'm cautious of time, looking at the clock. Just let me know if there are any questions. I'll be happy to elaborate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shala. That gives us a clear sense of both the progress and the ongoing challenges. And I cannot agree more. And it's just not a woman's issue; it's a peace and security issue when women are not on the table as men. So let's zoom out and look at the regional picture now. Across the Eastern Partnership countries, women often make up fewer than 20% of peace negotiators, and representation in the security sector's leadership is even lower. Yet civil society engagement by women remains high. So Regina, with your perspective through Team Kvinna, where you lead the regional office, you have a unique overview of the broader trends. So how are women leading or contributing to peace building across the Eastern Partnership countries? And what patterns you see both positive and concerning across the region?
Thank you a lot, and good morning, everyone. I'm happy to be today here and speak on behalf of Kvinna till Kvinna. It is such a vital question currently, because these years we see more conflicts than ever before. Last year, for example, the world was again at the level of the 1940s, in the level of the military conflicts. That brings us to the question why the world can't live peacefully, and where is the key to the sustainable and just peace. Working in the South Caucasus and Eastern Europe for more than 20 years, and also working in other conflict regions, we as Kvinna till Kvinna with our partners see some trends. One of the trends is that women are engaged in peace building very much, but they very often don't call it peace building. They call it sometimes activism, sometimes they call it humanitarian support, sometimes they call it work for community or helping others. So women from the 90s, especially in the South Caucasus region, where the conflicts have been protracted since 90s, they stood up and took the role of the first responders and the frontline responders to the humanitarian, social, economical needs to the communities in the frontline. This is the same trend that we see in Ukraine today and for the last couple of years. We also saw that in 2020, when the Second Karabakh War has been ongoing. The same was a pattern in Armenia and in Azerbaijan. Women from civil society, women experts stood up and took the role of the first responders. However, this is the challenging part, because majority of the women then are not recognized politically, and there is a very few women who are invited to the table or are not invited formally, sometimes consulted informally, or are, as Shahla very correctly pointed out, now the new trend is to involve sometimes or consult women on track 1.5 diplomacy, track 2 diplomacy somewhere, consultations with the women activists and experts. However, we see as a very big challenge to actual representation and participation in the peace efforts is taking the political stand and understanding that peace building today is happening not only around the tables or negotiation formats that are established and maybe not that successfully working in the field, but also peace thinking is happening in the classrooms, in the communities, in the displaced communities, in different places where women, together with men and their own communities, are doing everyday work. So the need is coming in the region specifically. Currently, we see the protracted conflicts, we see renewed conflicts and new setups. As Shahla also said, that Armenia and Azerbaijan have never been in such a close pathway to the actual peace agreement. We see the ongoing war in Ukraine. What is needed for sustainable peace and actually transformative peace to happen, it's the local ownership of the communities who will live that peace. If Armenia and Azerbaijan agrees to the peace deal, would the community stand behind? Would they have the ownership of that? At this moment of time, we working with local partners and supporting them in those efforts. We see from the women human rights defenders and their analysis that currently the fears are so high and untrust is so high within the communities that it's really hard to imagine that there will be a sustainable and long-lasting peace in place. The same we hear in Ukraine. There are a lot of fears around the peace talks as well. What does it mean when you are not taken seriously, and where the human security stands? So those trends and challenges are affecting women human rights defenders and women's rights organizations who are working for peace building and peace, but they are not considered equally politically. They have been given throughout the last couple of decades the role of social actors, civil society actors, working with the communities. So the multi-track diplomacy model doesn't really work when we are talking seriously about the peace and negotiations. In Ukraine, we see a lot of women's rights organizations who would like to contribute and have mediation efforts, have a lot of women experts who are working with the negotiation skills, with different dialogue schools. There are a lot of prepared people, but they are not really invited to the forums where decisions are made. And that's another challenge of rethinking the way how do we do negotiations and where the political landscape could meaningfully include women, younger women, older women, the previous experiences, but also all other communities to be really meaningfully intersectional. People from different backgrounds with ethnicity, religion backgrounds, they need to be listened in as well. So many of the women's rights organizations that we support in different countries of this region, they say about the proper understanding of the conflict dynamics, about the early warning systems that need to be established, about listening and taking in their voices and analysis as a serious political analysis, and then peace and security will be built, part of the peace and security will be built also involving their perspectives and needs. That would prevent the conflicts in the future, and that would help actually to sell the idea of the transformative and long-lasting peace. What is one of the biggest challenges we see in the context, we just finalized the analysis with the Ukrainian Women's Fund in Ukraine about where the money are going for women's rights in Ukraine. The analysis shows that only less than 1% of the all development and humanitarian funds are going directly to local women's rights organizations and local other type of civil society organizations, and even less to reaching out to peace building efforts by women local actors. This is very important point to take. So who are the ones driving the change? Who are the ones actually doing the actions? Those should be the local actors, but a majority of the support and international systems currently created and used to be in the place for a very long time, maybe not so much accustomed to the place where we are sitting today. And I would like to probably finalize this remarks as well, that the region is now in the very interesting and historical moment. What is happening in Ukraine will affect the South Caucasus countries. The fight for democracy, the fight for peace and transformative, very just peace is there in each of the context of this region. That's very important for all of us to understand, that change needs to happen in the models, in the systems, how we think and how we create the political landscape for the communities locally, but also politically. Thank you a lot.
Thank you, Regina. Thank you so much for this overview of the trends and challenges across the region, and also the different levels of progress. And I really like that you say peace building needs to be rooted in the community, not just on table. We'll circle back to that. Now let's bring in a global perspective. Gertrude, you recently attended the 69th session of the Commission on the Status of Women in New York, which also marked the 30th anniversary of the Beijing Declaration. So I just wonder if there is any discussion there that highlighted how women's roles in peace building have changed. And from your experience, what policies have effectively supported women's participation in peace building? And where are the biggest gaps? And it's big way if it's more focused on the Eastern Partnership region. Gertrude.
Listening both to Charlotte and Regina, we certainly have a lot of experiences in common, without doubt. Yes, I was in New York at CSW 69. The Beijing Plus 30 process was the topic or the theme. Were there a lot of talk about peace building? No, there wasn't. So I think most of us left the CSW with a feeling of disappointment, but also energized by the commitment and determination of women's organizations to do something about the situation. Now, I come from women's organizations and peace building as an NGO, not being part of the formal agenda of women, peace and security. But I wanted to highlight that in that sense, I am a true representative of what you both talk about, that women work for peace, even if it is not recognized, even if women's voices are excluded from formal situations. And just the other day, I read this old book, Down with Arms, by Berta von Suttner from 1889. And I felt it is very, very relevant also for today. So we live in a time with accelerating backlash on women's rights, and we have done that for 20 years. It's not anything new, but we discussed it a lot in CSW 69. That was actually the big discussion, the backlash, and how to understand it and how to counteract on it. Some facts. Nearly 2/3 of the registered victims of human trafficking in the European Union were women and girls. Women are lagging behind on measures such as unemployment benefits, pensions, healthcare. These are figures from 24. And to target today's topic, in 2023, none of the peace agreements reached included representatives of women's groups as signatories. So I feel my approach will be to focus on women's rights. And Women's Baltic Peace Building Initiative, we started, the initiative was taken in 2014 and we started in 2015. Because we were invited to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Stockholm, where the feminist foreign policy was presented by the former Minister of then Margot Wallström. And she said that women's organization in peace building is very, very important to build this feminist foreign policy. And therefore we started. And we said that, well, there might be different interpretations of how to work with peace building, and we support other organizations, traditional organizations, but our take is that to be able to work for peace, you have to start working with women's rights and have a women's rights perspective on whatever you do. And that is what we have continued with. And that is also what I have been doing in my work within the European Eastern Partnership in Armenia and Georgia, giving trainings, seminars, having discussions with, being partners of projects, dealing with women's rights. So our overall goal, also communicated everywhere I go, is that equality between women and men creates peace. It is, I think it is impossible to think of peace if you have great inequality between women and men. So our analysis being behind this overall goal is that living within inequality between women and men is to live in crisis. And therefore, building peaceful societies requires work for improving rights, freedoms, and living conditions for women. Therefore, we work on a broad scale, focus on how the design of welfare societies and democracy promotes peace building. And I think that the previous speakers, even if they started in peace building, they ended up in this broader perspective that women do a lot, but it is not recognized, and you have to recognize it. So the strategies here, and I think for the Eastern Partnership as well, is collaboration and partnership with other organizations. And that is what we do. We want to establish long-term collaborations with organizations, obviously in Sweden, with Winnet Sweden and others in the Baltic Sea area and in the Eastern Partnership countries. But we also have another strategy, and that is language and terminology on peace, gender, and women's human rights and freedoms. And therefore, here in Sweden, where we work, and also in our international corporations, we develop conceptual peace language for peace work from a women's perspective. We have local gravity, and we use the SDG 16 as profile approach.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Gertrude. And I can hear from you the formula for peace is the gender equality, and we'll return to the idea of collaboration shortly later on. And Mickey, now it's your turn. You've worked extensively to integrate gender into peace and security institutions, and an area where women continue to face deep-rooted stereotype and exclusion. So how do gender norms, including the ideas surrounding masculinity, affect the participation and treatment of both men and women in security sector? And what the implications for peace building? And actually, I have another question. It's not sure it's too much for 5 minutes, but what are the most pressing challenges to making security sector reform more gender responsive?
Thank you very much, Anne. It's a pleasure to be here and a privilege to speak among such a distinguished and knowledgeable panel. Yes, I mean, I think I will primarily speak about Ukraine, but also a little bit broader to the whole Eastern Europe region. I think what we see is that the region is really at a crossroads of, on one hand, still very strong traditional norms are prevalent with very sort of narrow views on masculinity and femininity. And at the same time, of course, coming closer to Europe and the European Union, and also a younger generation viewing these things a little bit differently, it really is at a crossroads when it comes to understanding gender and understanding masculinity and femininity. But I think the security sector, particularly in Ukraine, but across the region, is still very much influenced by these traditional gender norms. And I just want to give an example also of one of the challenges that we're currently facing with regards to the security sector and security sector reform. So last year I was in Kiev and I met with an international multilateral organization who is supporting Ukraine's security sector reform. And I met with some of the highest leaders of that organization to train them in gender responsive leadership. And one of the first things that they said when we started talking about gender in relation to security sector reform in Ukraine was that we think gender is important, and we worked on that in many different, other contexts outside of Ukraine, but we just don't feel comfortable talking about gender equality in Ukraine today with our national counterparts, because we see all these men going off to the front lines to fight, and who will be injured, who will be killed, and who will be traumatized. So how can we talk about gender equality at this time? And I think this is a huge barrier currently to doing gender mainstreaming in the security sector and security sector reform. This idea that, first of all, not even considering that gender is about both women and men. And what I answer these leaders in this multilateral organization who said this, how can we talk about gender with all these men going off to the front lines? And I said, well, then you've identified one of the main gender inequalities in Ukraine today, that an unproportional amount of men, even though women are also going off to the front lines, will be killed, will be injured and traumatized. That is a gender inequality. And that really stunned them and surprised them, because they have equated gender equality to only being about women and girls, and not seeing also the vulnerabilities and the needs of men and boys, and also not taking into account masculinities and masculinity norms. So I think that is a bit of a barrier. And I think we're in a situation right now, both in Ukraine and in the region and globally, where it's becoming harder to talk about gender equality in security sector reform, in peace building, in many different areas, because it's seen as we're in a crisis now. We have this large-scale war in Ukraine. We have the Israel's war in Gaza. We have so many conflicts. We have a backlash in terms of democracy, and gender equality will have to wait. We'll take that when we've solved the big issues. And of course, this is a historical mistake that we've seen over and over again. So I think this is a huge challenge that we're facing. And I think one of the things that I come back to when I'm working on women, peace and security in Ukraine, in the Eastern Europe region and globally, is really to try to avoid the capacity trap, because we see that, of course, peer learning among women's organizations is very important, and exchanging between regions, between countries in the Eastern Europe region is very important. But I think 25 years into the WPS agenda and 30 years since Beijing, there's still this very dominant narrative and a lot of resources that go into programming for capacity building for women. And I think this is problematic for the reason that it puts responsibility for gender equality on women. And it also indirectly tells women that if you were only smarter or more educated, or if you had better leadership skills, you would be included. You would get a seat at the table. And I think we all know that that's not reality. It's not about capacity. The women in the Eastern Europe region, they have capacity. They're very educated. like women globally. It's not about that. It's a power issue, and it's really about addressing the unequal power structures that hold women back, and make sure that women don't get access to these processes and formal negotiations, etc. So I think that that's also one of the key things to working on security sector reform, is we need to hold leaders accountable. We shouldn't put the responsibility on women to mainstream the security sector, to gender mainstream the security sector, or to ensure that women have equal rights in the security sector, or that gender is integrated in terms of meeting the needs of the population. We really need to hold leaders accountable, and we need to make sure that everyone understands that it's not a capacity issue, it's a power issue. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amiki. Yes, I really like that last sentence. It's not the capacity, but it's the power issue. And thank you for that. Various aspects of peacebuilding, it's not just technical, but also social and cultural as well. So now let's turn to Sweden experience. Christina, as a seasoned diplomat and a strong advocate for gender equality, you bring insight from a country that consistently ranks among the top 5 on the Women, Peace and Security Index. So my question is, how is Sweden supporting women's participation in peacebuilding in the Eastern Partnership region, both through diplomatic engagement or concrete peacebuilding programs or funding support?
Thank you very much, Ann. And just let me say that I'm very happy to have been invited to this panel, and I'm very humbled to join these participants who are the experts on this topic. But I think we have 2 organizations, one agency and one organization represented here today, who are currently implementing some of the Swedish support for the region, and this is very, very important. I want to pick up on what was said already about the Eastern Partnership region. The Eastern Partnership was launched in 2009. The region was a completely different region. The 6 countries were different, and the EU was different. Today, the challenges that we are encountering in the region are, of course, completely different from the ones we saw in 2009, and that requires new instruments and new approaches over the board. We are currently in rather difficult, I would say, to be honest, discussion on the future of the Eastern Partnership. Sweden is deeply convinced that the EU will need a strong framework to structure the relations and the cooperations and the support for these 6 countries also in the future. But we do need to adjust the partnership to the current challenges. And I'm very happy to see that gender equality and women's rights are finally making it into the discussions of the Eastern Partnership and the future of the framework. There is a new working group within the Eastern Partnership, as you all know, for a couple of years now on gender equality. This is a very important tool. All the 6 partner countries are represented, the EU institutions. Some of the member states, at every Eastern Partnership meeting, I take the opportunity, to advocate for a stronger participation from EU member states in this working group, because I think this is incredibly important. And it is about how to make women's rights more visible, because I do agree that this is about rights, it's about equality, but it is also about power. Well, Sweden is, of course, internationally, it is usually very pleasant to be present at different events where we discuss gender equality, because Sweden usually ends up, among the top countries where a lot is being done. But we all know that this is an ongoing process, and we need efforts, we need structures and ambitions every day. I can just mention the Swedish national action plans. We have implemented in Sweden several national action plans for the UN Security Council Resolution 1325, and these plans, they outline the strategic priorities, including inclusive peace processes and conflict prevention, protection of women and girls, leadership, expertise, and so on. And the latest national action plan for 2024 to 2028 continues to focus on these areas, ensuring that gender perspectives are integrated into all peace and security efforts. I should also say that the Swedish Foreign Policy Declaration, the main document outlining foreign policy for the country, identifies gender equality as a core value. Of course, we have a lot of capacity building and training in the region, and we have heard examples of that already. And I want to mention, of course, the Folke Bernadotte Academy playing a crucial role in training leaders and security personnel on gender responsive leadership. And then we also have the support for civil society, where Sweden has been strong for many years. And of course, the diplomatic engagement. Again, this is about raising these issues at taking every possible opportunity, because coming back to the region, the challenges that we see today are enormous, and this really demands new approaches. If I can mention, a couple of the challenges that we have when we are talking about the EU's approach to these issues in the region, I would say that despite efforts, despite positive outcomes in the region, we also do still have significant challenges. And I would say that they are very much related to both institutional limitations and the existing structures within the EU and the partner countries and the member states, of course. And these constraints can hinder the full implementation of gender-sensitive policies and practices. I'm very happy to see that Sweden has been for many years now seconded a gender equality expert to the European Commission. I know that the colleagues at the European Commission are very much appreciative of the work of our Swedish expert there, and I very much hope that we will continue with this practice, because I'm afraid that if Sweden will not be doing this, I don't think many other member states would pick up on that. We can also see that we have, within the work of civil society and the programs, we have the role of individuals. The individuals sometimes, this can be, a challenge, because if we have weak structures and weak frameworks for our efforts for the support, everything ends up with the individuals, with the enthusiasm and the many hours, working hours put into every program. And this leads to, this brings many risks, because we do have several examples when these individuals working so hard for what they believe in, they simply cannot make it, because they are not being propped up with the proper frameworks and strong institutions and organizations. And this is often a very lonely work. But Sweden will continue to support the region. The Eastern Partnership region is a high priority to Sweden. We will do what we can to see to that the EU keeps the structure, keeps the framework for this country, and we will definitely push for more gender equality and more inclusion of women in the peace negotiations. The war in Ukraine, Russia's invasion of Ukraine is a huge challenge. And I can hear, the same arguments when I work with the and I will finish on this. When I work with the Belarusian democratic forces in exile, you know, the repression in Belarus is absolutely terrible. I mean, thousands of political prisoners, traumatized families ending up in exile. There are huge problems with, you know, domestic violence and women's and girls' situation. And when I try to address this with many democratic forces, they tell me that this is not the right time. We can do this later. Now we have to focus on more urgent issues. But still, we from Sweden try again to introduce these issues because it's absolutely necessary. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. And despite on the challenges, that some of the challenges you described, and it's encouraging to hear how Sweden is pushing this agenda forward, combining political dialogue and on-the-ground support, and also within institutions. And also some progress, you can see some progress, as you say, in the Eastern Partnership framework. So looking forward to discussing that more later on. Now let's turn to peace building success stories. And we'd like to hear some examples of what worked and what we can learn from them. Shala, can you share some examples of how women through your organization help bring about peace or resolve the conflict? You mentioned a bit earlier, but maybe more specific, some more example. And like what role they play and what impact did it have? And what do you think made it work?
Thank you very much for the question, and thank you to all the panelists. I think that picture is almost complete. I mean, we see a lot of good and bad examples. We see definitely a lot of challenges. But there are a lot of also pathways to solve these, to find the solutions for these situations. Coming to this very specific question, and I should say that all those women peace builders and human rights defenders which are currently working in Azerbaijan can be regarded as role models on almost, because so tough it is nowadays to work as a civil society stakeholder, especially in these politically sensitive topics. So this is already a big contribution and dedication, which requires a lot of components, including the courage, including the resilience, including the stamina, and many other features. As coming to the specific community examples, I would rather say that we had at different stages, different priorities. And one of the stages was we made all our efforts putting together the action plan, National Action Plan 1325. For you to know, Azerbaijan has never had the National Action Plan 1325, although we have been through the 3 decades of conflict, still no action plan. And the very process it took us, our organization was dealing with that in those times. And I personally spent more than 10 years of my life to putting this together. And at different stages, we were passing through different, components, like how to make this plan as embracing as possible, as inclusive as possible. And we were trying to put together not all the stakeholders, not just, those who will implement that action plan, but also those to whom it's targeted. And it was a stage I remember when we were working with the community leaders from the IDP communities, just to see how we can include their needs, like to the best of the possibility. And I was amazed. It actually, last year and the year before, it was a culmination of our times when we got to know those leaders, community leaders, which you would, at the first glance, would never tell what an important work they are doing. So we're trying to learn from them. And what was amazing is that the jobs they do, they also don't see it as a project. They think that it is their, it's their mission. They are so much dedicated to that. They are just doing the ordinary job, whatever they are doing. It could be librarian, it could be a teacher, it could be, any other profession, does not matter. Sometimes she does not even have a job as such, a formal job. But the way she sings, the very mindset, the way she talks and delivers this message of the peace that it should be there. It's impossible to escape that we are the neighbors, that we have to build a culture of peace. Otherwise, our children, like, it should be put in a very simple language. But the most important is to have the courage to pronounce actually what she's saying in the times when, peace building was almost equaling to betrayal. That is, I think, the heroism as such, and we should support these women as such as much as possible. But also, it's very important, just using the possibility, I should say, that we are still not having the National Action Plan 1325. Like, coming to that, I'm thinking what else can be and should be done to get it approved finally. I'm personally the author of the 3 formal versions of the NAPs, which were submitted to the government of Azerbaijan. There was a lot of listening and advocacy around that. They admit, they say that it's necessary indeed, because the National Action Plan is not just about the policy, but it's also about certain action as such. And I don't say that it's panacea of all the problems. Of course, when it's adopted, it does not mean that all the solutions will be there in place immediately, but at least it gives us a framework to act. And it has a good and equal distribution between the 4 pillars. And one of the pillars is so actual in Azerbaijan today, because we are building back the Karabakh, and the Karabakh region needs women, and it needs, women's engagement. Not just we are doing it for men and women. It's also needed to involve women. It's a rebuilding stage. So relief and recovery at the last pillar has so important components to engage women, to make them benefit more, and to own also the results. And it would be amazing to have this National Action Plan. So basically, to have it there, that would be indeed a very good next step. And maybe I'm just ahead of the plan, but if I am to ask of certain recommendations, what can be done for Azerbaijan, one of them definitely would be to push those leverages to make the national action plans get approved in Azerbaijan as much as possible. Also to make the process symmetric, like out of the 3 South Caucasus countries, we are the only one not having the national action plan, never had the national action plan. Armenia, I think, has finalized the 2nd national action plan, and they are to start the 3rd one. Georgia is to finalize the 5th one and to start the 6th one. And of course, it's not that comparison, but we are doing this comparison to show that for symmetric action, we should improve that. And it's not the classical model of the national action plan as such. We should also get into account certain, new modalities, new trends, like about the water management, for example, transboundary water management, which can be a good niche for the peace builders to play around and to step onto and to do something which is not, which is indirectly also contributing to peace. This is one of the recommendations. I know that you will have the round of recommendations in a while, but I just wanted to use this opportunity and say that this landscape requires all the ingredients, beginning from the policy level up to the community level, because we are so interconnected, and without the two, we would not be making it complete as such.
Thank you, Shala. Yes, certainly we'll get back to talking more on the recommendations. But it's very inspiring story to hear how active involvement at the local level can really make a difference, even without an action plan. So, Regina, can you share a successful program led by Kvinna till Kvinna, and why is it successful?
Thank you. Let me just start from saying that peace building is not a project as such, as Shahla was saying. It's investment into the future, and very often the results are seen very, very, very long time after. So I will share some of the practical things that we have been doing 10 years ago, 7 years ago, 15 years ago with Kvinna till Kvinna. And now we see the results coming up in the moment of crisis, in the moment of, in the momentum when it's actually needed. So one of those examples was more than 10 years ago, Kvinna till Kvinna has been doing the Young Women Peace Academy. And it's about this capacity, but I agree with the colleague from FBA. Very often we are so switched on to this capacity development, and it's taking away the attention from what actually is missing. And very often that capacities is not about just public speaking or understanding the conflict dynamics or some theories. It's also about giving the spaces where women are learning to be themselves and listening to their own voice and understanding their own countries and their own strategies for the future. So 10 years ago, or even more, those young women at the time were engaged in this loose network between each other in the region. And today, I will not name the names, but all of the women that you hear speaking about the women, peace and security have been either alumnus of this academy or have been informally participating in the events and doing some stuff in the South Caucasus region and Western Balkans as well. Another example that we treat as a success, also with the Swedish support some years ago, we did a task force for women, peace and security. We, as an organizers, we thought that this would be across the divide, Armenian, Azerbaijani, women experts would come together, produce some policies. It didn't work that way because Karabakh war in 2020 started, the pandemic was there. However, afterwards, after the whole challenges that Armenian community is going through still now in Armenia, this group of women who came together rethinking the peace building and what is peace for them actually in their own terms. They are now one of the strongest voices in Armenia on women, peace and security, self-led, self-organized without any project money or so to say, working with all of the local communities along the border lines with the displaced communities from Karabakh, and actually talking on a policy level with EU mission on the ground, with the policy developers, and trying to influence also the peace talks and the positions of the communities within those peace talks as well. So I think the investment in peace building, it starts from the local small action maybe, and sometimes we hear that from negotiators, co-chairs sometimes, especially men. So why do you need to invest in those women so much? Like you have been training them for so long, and it's local, community-based, it's a smaller organizations. But actually what it matters that the investment in those communities, the understanding of the theories, but also understanding and grounding their own voices allows them then to be stronger in presenting the attitudes and represent the communities that they stand behind. So many of those women are now not only in civil society. When they started their activism in the youth days, they are now represented in the governments. They are in different countries. They are leading voices in the private sector, very often working for IMFs and different other institutions. So it's important investment into the future. And I would say, once again, what I started from, peace building, they don't call it peace building, but this is what we at Kvina, we say it's feminist peace. It's in their own right. They building in the classrooms in other communities. And then they bring this understanding to other layers of this society where they are. Yeah.
Thank you, Regina. Your emphasis on long-term investment in capacity building really stood out, and that kind of sustained effort often gets overlooked, but clearly makes the difference. Gertrude, can you also share an example from your organizations, and can this be applied in the Eastern Partnership region?
Thank you. Well, Women's Baltic Peacebuilding Initiative is not what we call a frontline organization, but some of our partners are. But we work at a structural level, and so does WOPI, Women's Platform for Action International. And as you might guess, WOPI is built on CEDAW and Beijing Platform for Action, which actually I think is the starting point for the Women, Peace and Security agenda very, very directly. Reading the Beijing Platform for Action, you get a lot of understanding of what has to be done. But I will share a success that we succeeded in 6 months after being in the CSW 68, and we started the building of WOPI, and now WOPI has been running for 6 months. But during this time, and this is a global organization, and obviously it's open for EAP countries as well, and we do have members from the Eastern Partnership. So they have been part of what we've done. We've submitted a paper to the CEDAW committee on their general recommendations 41, which is ongoing on stereotypes, which several of you have already touched upon, that women are stereotyped, men also, out of being in decision making. We have sent an open letter to the Secretary General of the UN on the UN 80 initiative. That is about reforming the whole of UN. So we sent a support letter for Emel Salem, which is the Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women, who has been slandered and met enormous resistance because of her reporting on all kinds of violence against women, as it is written in, for instance, Beijing Platform for Action and in the declaration on violence against women already from 1993. One of these papers are on prostitution, and that is the first time that question, which is part of CEDAW, Article 6, as you all know, this is the first time that it was really written about thoroughly at that level in the UN system. And she says prostitution is violence as such. It's nothing else but prostitution. But obviously, that also points to problems that we have on this international area, which also makes it more difficult to work at the local level. Because at the same time, UN Women says we don't say prostitution anymore, we say sex work. That is just one example of both successes and problems that we face. So I think I stay there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gertrude. Now move on to FBA. Can you share your example of how, when you apply gender perspective, lead to more inclusive or effective peace-building outcomes, and if that experience can give some lesson to the Eastern Partnership region? If it's not
Happy to do so. So I actually want to start with an example that is a little bit more organic, where there wasn't any gender analysis or gender perspective applied from the beginning, but rather this came about organically. But I think this is a very interesting example from Ukraine. So when the Russian full-scale invasion happened in 2022, we saw that the fire and rescue brigade in Ukraine was under enormous pressure throughout the entire country. And during this time, it was also a very difficult time for the civilian population because the Russian full-scale invasion came, even though there were, of course, tensions building up, it still came as a shock to a lot of people who had not time to flee or put themselves in safety. So what happened is that a lot of the majority of the fire brigade and rescue workers are men in Ukraine. And what happened is that their families, their wives and children who did not have safe places to stay, many of them moved into the fire brigades and basically stay there. So they were like sleeping there, they were living there for weeks to seek shelter in this very difficult time. And what happened then is quite interesting, because this led to a revitalization within the fire and rescue brigades and in the leadership, that they realized that there were gender dimensions to what was happening. And they also realized that they could not conduct their work in an efficient way with having so many like civilians, women, and also children staying in these fire and rescue brigades. So This led to a discussion at a higher level in Ukraine, engaging multiple actors. And this ultimately led to the establishment of over 4,000 unbreakable points in Ukraine. And unbreakable points, so the translation in Swedish is trygghetspunkter. And that means that those 4,000 unbreakable points are places where civilians can seek shelter. So where they can get access to shelter, to heating, to food, to water, to medicines, to electricity, all those things that you need for security and safety. And the majority of these are women with their underage children. So also with a lot of men being away at the front lines and women struggling to really protect their families and to make sure that they have food and shelter and water, electricity, etc. These 4,000 unbreakable points have been really crucial. And this has been very inspiring to a lot of other actors. I know now in Sweden that actors who work on the civilian defense, they are now taking these lessons from Ukraine to establish also these type of unbreakable points in Sweden in case of a crisis or emergency. But if you take a more sort of planned approach, I think it's been good to see that more donors are putting in conditions with regards to their support to Ukraine when it comes to the energy infrastructure, saying that you have to do a gender analysis and you have to make sure that you prioritize schools and kindergartens. Because what we see in Ukraine with very harsh winters is that in the wintertime, when the Russians are attacking the energy infrastructure, it means that a lot of schools, if you don't prioritize them in the energy support, if you don't prioritize them, then schools and kindergartens remain closed. And what happens then is you see very significant impact with regards to gender, and especially for women, that when they are closed, who has to stay at home with the children? Well, in a society that is still very traditional, where a lot of the men are at the front lines, most of the children will stay at home with their mothers. And we see an impact here where employers in Ukraine say, I don't want to hire women because if the schools and kindergartens aren't open, then I risk losing them because they're not going to come to work. They're going to have to stay at home with their children. And we see that this has an enormous impact. It's like a domino effect where that also leads to women having a harder time to leave violent relationships because they don't have the financial means to do so. They don't have an income. It leads to increased poverty and food insecurity. And it also leads to women being more vulnerable to sex trafficking, to prostitution. So it really impacts women's security in a very negative way. So I think those are two examples. One is that's a little bit more planned, where you really get that into the plans and you make sure that you prioritize kindergartens and schools. And that has positive security outcomes for women and also, of course, for their children. But the other one being a really interesting example from Ukraine of how it organically can create a realization that there are gender perspectives. And by establishing these unbreakable points, you're able to provide protection and security for a very large part of the population.
Thank you, Emike. That's a very strong example from Ukraine, and it really shows that inclusion delivers better results. Christina, what do you think the biggest challenge in translating women peace and security policy commitments into real progress for women leading peace building in the region?
Well, I think that many thanks for the question. I think one of the biggest challenges for now is to move the discussion on women's rights and the inclusion of women in peace building in the region from the current level, the working level with civil society, state agencies, organizations, and so on, to also move it up to the political level. I find it quite challenging that we so rarely in political meetings touch upon these issues. I try to mention them, but that's clearly not enough. I would like also for our ministers, every now and then we have a foreign ministers meeting for the 27 member states, the 5 partner countries, because Belarus is obviously not participating, and the EU institutions, where we discuss the framework. And I would very much want to see these issues also making their way into these discussions, because that would force every member state, also every partner country, and the EU institutions to prepare for each and every meeting. And hopefully that would also lead to a wish to have some deliverables from those meetings, and maybe taking steps forward also on the political level. Because of course we all know, and you especially, the other panelists, you know about all the tremendous work being done on the ground. And I mean, for Sweden, on the part of Sweden, we could only continue the support both for our state agencies, international organizations, and the civil society doing this on the ground. But I think we would need to add also the political dimension. I was happy to see that on the 8th of March, the government of Sweden launched a new support for women in Ukraine by contribution to UN Women of 22.5 million Swedish kronas. And the aim of the program is to enhance women's participation and leadership in public life and to combat sexual and gender-based violence. I will not go into detail in some of the issues that colleagues have been mentioning, but I would still want to also just shortly touch upon a security issue that we are facing in the region. Colleagues were talking about masculinity. We have different studies on attitudes among young people in the region. I was in Warsaw the other day and met a think tank who is monitoring attitudes of young people in Russian-speaking countries. Of course, we have the social medias. We have TikTok. We have, a tremendous amount of different information reaching young people. And the think tank in Warsaw was pointing to the fact that young people today in many countries with Russian-speaking population, you can see that the young people, especially young men, have much more conservative views and attitudes than even their parents had. This is an increasing challenge, and I think the EU is not at all on board when it comes to the disinformation and the information reaching young people in the region. We don't have the instruments to counter this at all. We are constantly referring to, hybrid threats and disinformation and debunking myths. But I don't think at all that we have the instruments needed within the European Union. And I think this is also one of the new challenges in the region that we are not prepared for. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. It seems like bridging the gap between ambition and action is hard, but it's good to hear how it's addressed and the importance of the political dimension. We have about 15 minutes left, and I think let's just building on the success stories and turn on what needs to happen next, like the strategies, policies, partnerships, advocacy, so that we can strengthen women's leadership in peace building. And very short, I think during your talk, you already touched upon that. So just very quickly, 2 minutes each, just say what needs to happen. I'll start with Shala.
Yes, indeed. I mean, whatever we can say, it's hard to implement immediately, but it should be done all the time, consequently and sustainably. In the context of Azerbaijan, what I see as the most challenging thing is the continued shrinking space for the civil society. This is unchanged in the bad meaning of this word for the last 12 years, I would say, starting from the end of 13. Unfortunately, we are experiencing the de-escalations in different times, and the last year and a half was one of the hardest in the life of civil society and in the life of human rights defenders, including the women human rights defenders. So we were asking for equality, but we didn't mean the equality in the meaning of harassment and intimidation toward the women as well. So what can be and should be done, definitely. We all know that the support of international community towards the civil society in the countries is extremely important, and very often the support is interpreted as just financial support, which is definitely very important and should continue. But when I talk of support, I basically mean the support, the political support, the capacity building support, the advocacy support, even the space like this. I mean, it is so important to have the opportunity to speak out, to share the concerns, to ask for the, support and recommendations and give the recommendations. So anything of the kind at different levels, at the higher level, at small level, that's already giving us the hope that we are not isolated, we are not left alone. Because very often in the context of Azerbaijan, here, please understand me correctly, with all my sympathy, love and respect to the dedication of people of Ukraine and Belarus, I should remind that region does not consist only of these countries. It's also different countries like Georgia, like Azerbaijan, which permanently needs support, of course Moldova, of course Armenia. So I mean, we all have very different levels of problems, but it's more than Ukraine. And I fully agree with Regina that the result of Ukraine war will definitely influence on the destiny of all other countries in the region. And it is tremendously important to continue supporting Ukraine by all the means. But still, we should not be forgotten, because very often what we feel inside Azerbaijan is that we are completely forgotten. We are not supported, we're left alone, and it's not at the level again of funding, which is included as well. There are no special packages for Azerbaijan. You know that the people who continue working in Azerbaijan are being persecuted, and it's continuing every day. There is not a single day when a women human rights defender or a human rights defender is not invited to the police office or prosecutor's office. And inviting is a soft word. It's how to say, it's a polite word. Sometimes they are not invited, they are taken from the middle of the street in a very violent way, putting down their dignity, putting down and questioning the whole credibility of the person. But that's a separate story. What I'm to say is that it is very important to demarche. My expectation is not only the international community from abroad should do it, but also the local, those who are located inside a country, like the embassies, the diplomatic corps, they should be doing the demarche, and they should protect this, make at least an effort to protect the partners, all those whom they have been supporting, communicating, asking the information from, meeting for the lunches, breakfast and dinners. All of this is important to continue and even intensify, but also parallelly to talk to the government of Azerbaijan, saying that what all these people were doing throughout the years was not illegal. And it's not good to present it as a illegal word, because it puts down the credibility of not only the human rights community, but also of the country itself, especially in these fragile times when we are at the very important periods prior to the peace agreement, prior to certain, important milestones. So this communication should be intensified. And my huge expectation is from the international community is to enter into this dialogue and to try to facilitate these issues, not just waiting when everything comes down. And sometimes I personally feel irritated when I hear from the international community, oh, we protect you by not inviting you. But that's not the good word. Do invite us and let us decide whether we want to participate in that or not. Let us take our own choice for taking that level of risk to participate or not, to speak out or not, etc. But for us, it's important to be included into all the agendas, to be invited into all these advocacy meetings, and to be also having the access to certain stakeholders, to certain resources, to certain actions and opportunities. So basically, if I am to mention one recommendation, I would definitely tell that not investing into the civil society anymore, because we are not at that stage. We are at the most critical stage at the moment, but actually rescuing the civil society. If you want the civil society of Azerbaijan to survive somehow, it is high time to do some action for that, to do some demarche, to do certain policy, not just to discuss it, but also do the action finally to feel us protected and supported to the extent possible. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Shala. We hear you. Regina, what should be done?
Thank you. I will be short and brief. I just want to remind us that the militarization reinforces patriarchal structures. So whenever we talk on the highest levels about the more weapons and military structures, yes, it's needed to defend ourselves, but human rights are also needed for the defense. So it needs to be taken at the same level, the human security factors and the all mechanisms on all of the levels, including like in Ukraine, but not only, as Shahla is saying, the region is not only a big war in Ukraine, which affects the region on a different scale. Because change for peace starts from the communities, and my really big recommendation to see peace building not as just narrowed mediation efforts across the divides and already existing mechanisms, but also more intra-society work on intra-society conflict transformation, where a lot of dialogues need to happen, a lot of transformation in peace building within the societies needs to happen with the gender sensitive lens and approach. Therefore, it's so important that we involve also young women and young leaders of today from civil society, but also from the academia and other places, because the peace belongs to them. They will live in the future world. So 3 points. Militarization should not go only as such, but also human rights need and human security needs to be accounted for. The intra-society dialogue on conflict transformation and conflict divides need to be bridged within the societies as well. And then the third one, engage young women and young leaders of today within the societies on the political level, not just as listeners to the panels, but also as the ones to have the actual voice on the political level. Thank you a lot.
Thank you, Regina, for that 3 points. Gertrude.
Thank you. We have to secure core funding for women's organizations internationally, but not only that, also in Sweden, because the trend is going backwards in all countries. So it's very difficult for us to be part in international cooperation when we don't have not 1 krona in support from anyone, not from Sweden, not from anyone. That is first. Secure funding. We have to secure sex disaggregated data if we want to do something. And I think we have to embed women's rights as a standing item in UN processes. And that should be something that, for instance, the foreign ministry in Sweden could start with, being brave as always, and being part of being innovative when it comes to build institutions. We have to be innovative. The old ones are not very productive anymore, and they don't produce what we want them to produce. So for instance, in one of the projects with Armenia and Georgia, we suggested to build a policy area women within the European Union Baltic Sea region. So we have to be innovative and build something new. We can join forces, as I tried to say before, to renovate Commission on the Status of Women, UN Women, to renovate language, and to secure women being a group carrying human rights, which is secured in UN conventions, but is not secured in reality. So we have to do that. And I think that the work we carried out within the European, the UN Economic Commission of Europe, the UN Economic Commission of Europe, is a good example of this kind of cooperation, coming up with more or less fantastic ideas. For instance, that we should ask or demand, if we want to, an extra UN General Assembly on women's rights, led by women's rights organizations. It would be great if Sweden could take that initiative. And we invite the whole, all countries in the Eastern Partnership. Thank you.
Thank you, Gertrude. And Vicky.
Thank you. I echo everything that's been said thus far. And I think we really need to invest in gender responsive leadership. We need leaders to step up, not only with regards to ensuring that gender is mainstreamed in all programming on peace and security, but we also need them to step up with regards to ensuring secure core funding for women's organizations, and also ensuring that there is an enabling environment for women and women's organizations to participate in all processes related to peace and security. So I think that's really key. And that's why at FBA, we've now been working for 5 years with our Gender Responsive Leadership Initiative. We provided gender responsive leadership courses to some of the highest leadership in the EU, in the UN, in the OSCE, and we're now taking this initiative to Eastern Europe. So currently there's courses happening in partnership with the Swedish police to train the police in Moldova in gender responsive leadership. And we are currently working in Ukraine with UNDP in partnership, where we now have a number of ministries who are interested in gender responsive leadership courses. They are responsible for the recovery and reconstruction, and also for the EU accession. And in Ukraine, we know that women's organizations have been very critical of these processes, said that they have, it's been very gender blind, and that they have not had access to really shape and influence these processes. And through gender responsive leadership and through holding leaders accountable, we hope to be a part of addressing this. So I think leadership is key, because in the end, it's about power. And those who have power have responsibility for gender equality. Thank you.
Thank you, Mickey. And Christina, what do you see that Sweden or broadly EU can do?
Well, let me just, of course, echo everything that was said and all these important issues. Let me also say that Shala, I have not yet mentioned Armenia and Azerbaijan and the fantastic work that you are doing. You are literally keeping Azerbaijan on the civil society map of the Eastern Partnership. And I know, I want you to know that. I'm coming back, to the importance of the civil society component of the Eastern Partnership. Eastern Partnership is unique in the sense that it has the civil society component built in from the beginning. No other EU framework or initiative has this component as one of the building stones. And that is also, I think, one of the strongest arguments why the EU should keep the Eastern Partnership, because without the Eastern Partnership, we will lose the civil society component. We have not today, because that's a separate discussion, touched upon the exit of the USAID from the region. This is this unfortunate development is having, as you all know, huge effects on the region. The Swedish government is currently looking into both the effects and the possibilities to compensate for some of it, but unfortunately we all know that we will not be able to fill all the gaps. But I know there are ongoing discussions to see whether we can have more countries, more Western countries coming in as donors in this very critical time, very critical moment for the civil society. So I think that what we need to do from the Swedish government, of course, is to keep the framework, to keep the civil society and the organizations active in the region, strong, and also, of course, listen to all of you actors on the ground, what you are picking up, or your recommendations and your advice, and to push this through the Swedish policy also on the EU level. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. And on speakers, we are almost nearly at the end of our webinar. I just don't know if there's anything you'd like to add that you think is important that we have not touched upon today. I don't see that we have any audience questions. We see that we have some comments, but we don't have any questions. So thank you all, your speakers, for your contribution, and to everyone who joined us online today. And if there's one thing we've heard clearly is that women are not just part of peace building, they are essential to making it last. So let's carry that momentum forward, not just in our conversation, but also how we fund, design, and deliver peace building across the region, and with women at the center. Thank you again, and goodbye.